The system was not a divine mystery, it was a bureaucracy. A sprawling, infinite, and often infuriatingly inefficient bureaucracy. While heroes saw it as a source of quests and divine power, Arthur Penhaligon saw it for what it truly was: a labyrinth of rules, regulations, clauses, and subclauses, all waiting to be exploited by someone with a keen enough eye and a strong enough will. Arthur was not a hero. He was a clerk. Name: Arthur Penhaligon. Class: System Adjudicator Grade 1. Level 2. Level 2, 135,500 CEXP. Primary attributes: Intelligence, INT. 16, for comprehending complex regulations. Wisdom, WIS. 14, for interpreting intent and precedent. Charisma, CHA, 11, for filing motions and oral arguments. Constitution, Con. 8, a consequence of long hours and poor posture. Core skills: System legal framework comprehension. Passive: grants a foundational understanding of the system's core rule set. File motion. Active: submit a formal request, grievance, or appeal to the system. Mana cost 5, cite precedent. Active: reference a previous system ruling to support a current motion. Mana cost 3, cross-reference. Active: simultaneously view and compare up to 3 related system documents. Mana cost 1 per minute. His experience points were CEXP case experience points earned not from slaying beasts, but from successfully processing prayers, resolving minor disputes, and closing case files. His office was a cramped, dusty cubicle in the sub-basement of the Grand Cathedral of Ethel, a place filled with the endless rustle of parchment and the faint ozone smell of divine paperwork. Arthur's current case was a perfect example of his mundane reality. Case file: 77B Alpha 6, a prayer request from a farmer named Old Man Hemlock. The farmer was praying for rain. Arthur's job was to process it. He activated cross-reference, his vision filling with 3 semi-transparent windows of text. One was the prayer itself. The second was the regional weather pact, a complex agreement between the local nature deities. The third was Hemlock's personal system file. After 10 minutes of tedious reading, he found the problem. Hemlock's tithe to the local harvest deity was 3 days late. As per subclause 412 of the Divine Intervention Act, this rendered him temporarily ineligible for meteorological boons. Arthur sighed, filled out Form 23 Delta, prayer request denial, and stamped it with a flicker of mana. Reason: ineligibility due to outstanding tithe, he muttered. He filed the form, closed the case, and was rewarded with a paltry 5 CEXP. This was his life. 1 day, however, a case landed on his desk that was different. It was an anomaly, a file that should have been routed to the much higher-level Department of Monster Control. Case file, SHOT-G 616. Grievance, unclaimed soul remnants, goblin infestation. The grievance was filed by the spirit of a deceased adventurer, a level 15 rogue named Shadow Step Silas. According to Silas's post-mortem testimony, he had been slain by a goblin shaman in the Mirkwood Bog. The shaman had then used a soul trap ritual, but had been killed by Silas's party members before the ritual could be completed. The result was a legal and metaphysical mess. Silas's soul had passed on to the proper afterlife, but the remnants, the fragments of his skills, experience, and class energy, were left behind, tethered to the shaman's corpse and now being absorbed by the local goblin tribe. The goblins were, in essence, illegally leveling up using stolen assets. This was a major violation. Arthur's job was simply to note the jurisdiction error and file a motion to reassign. But as he prepared the paperwork, his system legal framework comprehension skill pinged a faint, intriguing connection in his mind. He paused, his quill hovering over the parchment. He started digging. He pulled up the system's charter on soul rights, the monster evolution codes, and the adventurer's pact. For hours, he cross-referenced, his small office filling with the ghostly images of floating legal documents. And then he found it. A beautiful, obscure, and utterly game-changing loophole. The Clause of Unclaimed Souls. System Charter, Volume 9, Subsection 12, Paragraph H, stated that if a soul's remnants were left unclaimed by a rightful heir or designated party member for a period of 72 hours, and if they were being illegally exploited by a non-sentient or lesser sentient species, goblins qualified, the assets were to be considered metaphysically derelict. The next part was the key. Derelict metaphysical assets did not simply vanish. The system, in its bureaucratic wisdom, abhorred a vacuum. The clause stipulated that a system adjudicator had the authority to file a motion for asset liquidation and reappropriation. In essence, the adjudicator who processed the case had the legal right to seize the unclaimed assets for themselves as a processing fee. It was an archaic rule, likely written to handle bizarre edge cases and long since forgotten. But it was still on the books. It was legal. Arthur's heart hammered in his chest. This was it. This was the opportunity he had been waiting for, the one that could lift him out of this dusty basement and into the real game. He checked the timestamp on the grievance. 71 hours and 45 minutes had passed. He had 15 minutes to act. Silas's party, according to the file, had been wiped out shortly after his death. There were no heirs. The assets were well and truly derelict. His hands trembled as he pulled up a blank motion form. This was a high-stakes gamble. If he miscited a single precedent or used the wrong terminology, his motion would be denied, and he might even face a penalty for filing a frivolous claim. But if he succeeded, he began to write, his quill flying across the page with a speed and precision he had never known. He cited the Clause of Unclaimed Souls. He referenced the Goblin Sapience Act of the Third Era to classify them as lesser sentient. He quoted 3 separate precedents from the archives where the system had ruled against monsters illegally using hero-class energies. He built his case layer by layer, a perfect, unassailable legal argument. He finished with seconds to spare, his mana flickering as he stamped the document with the full force of his file motion skill. Motion for asset liquidation and reappropriation. Filed. Case file. G616. Petitioner, Arthur Penhaligon, System Adjudicator, Grade 1. Subject, derelict metaphysical assets of Shadow Step Silas, deceased. Status, pending review. The silence in his cubicle was deafening. He waited. 1 minute. 2 minutes. He imagined his motion flying through the ethereal channels of the system, being scrutinized by silent, unknowable arbiters. He had either just signed his own disciplinary warrant, or he had just changed his life forever. Then a chime echoed in his mind, louder and clearer than any CEXP notification he had ever received. Motion approved. Ruling: the assets of Shadow Step Silas are declared derelict. The Goblin tribe of Mirkwood Bog is found in violation of the Soul Integrity Act. Directive: all claimed assets are hereby seized and reappropriated to the petitioner, Arthur Penhaligon, as per the Clause of Unclaimed Souls. You have been awarded 1/500 CEXP. You have leveled up. You are now level 5. New skill acquired. Writ of Summons. Class upgrade available. System Adjudicator Grade 2. A wave of energy washed over him, a feeling of pure, intoxicating power. But that was just the beginning. A second wave followed. This one feeling alien, sharp, and cunning. It was the essence of the rogue, absorbing derelict class remnants. Subclass acquired, Rogue, Level 1. You have gained skill, Stealth, Rank E. You have gained skill, Dagger Proficiency, Rank E. You have gained skill, Minor Lockpicking, Rank E. Arthur stared at his status screen, his mind reeling. He was an adjudicator and a rogue. He had a subclass. He had skills that didn't involve paperwork. He could pick locks. He could wield a dagger. The world had just cracked wide open. He stood up, a slow smile spreading across his face. The system wasn't just a bureaucracy, it was a rulebook. And he was going to read every single page. Gaining a subclass and a host of new skills was one thing. Applying them was another. Arthur spent the next week in a state of quiet euphoria. poring over the system's legal framework with a newfound zeal. He found that his rogue subclass had subtly influenced his primary class. He could now perceive loopholes not just as possibilities, but as opportunities for exploitation, like a thief spotting a loose window latch. His newfound power did not go unnoticed. His immediate superior, a fussy, by-the-books Grade 4 adjudicator, named Supervisor Bromwell, gave him a suspicious look. "Remarkable work on the Mirkwood case, Penhaligon," Bromwell had said, his tone implying that Arthur had somehow cheated. "The High Arbiters have taken an interest. They've assigned you a new case. Try not to overstep." The new case file was thick and bound in red tape, indicating a high-priority, high-danger classification. Case file, Year DR 901, Territorial Dispute and Property Damage Claim, Cinder Peak Mountain. The petitioner was a coalition of dwarven mining clans. The respondent was a young, hot-headed red dragon named Ignis, who had recently claimed Cinder Peak Ike as his new lair, summarily evicting the dwarves by the simple yet effective method of setting their beards on fire. The dwarves were filing a formal grievance, demanding the dragon be removed and that he pay reparations for damaged mining equipment and several centuries' worth of singed facial hair. This was a case for the enforcers, the paladin legions who served as the system's police force. An adjudicator's role was merely to process the paperwork before the knights were sent off to slay the beast, but Arthur saw it differently. He saw a legal battle. He spent 2 days locked in his cubicle, cross-referencing draconic sovereignty, treaties, ancient land-grant charters from the First Era, and the surprisingly detailed system regulations on property damage caused by Class 5 elemental exhalations. He discovered 2 critical pieces of information. First, the dwarves' claim to the mountain, while ancient, was based on a charter that had a tiny, almost unnoticeable expiry clause. The charter was for 1,000 years or until the return of the Fiery Scourge. The Fiery Scourge was an archaic name for red dragons. The charter had, legally, expired the moment Ignis landed. The dwarves were technically squatters. Second, and more importantly, he found a powerful legal tool that was almost never used: the writ of summons. His new skill wasn't for summoning demons, it was for summoning a party to a legal proceeding. A duly summoned individual was legally compelled by the system to attend a hearing. Failure to appear would result in immediate and severe penalties, such as stat drains, skill locking, or even level reduction. No one ever used it on a dragon because it was considered suicide. A dragon would simply eat the adjudicator who served the summons. But Arthur had a rogue subclass. He had stealth. He filed a motion. Not to attack the dragon, but to mediate. Motion to intervene and mediate filed. Case file, JARC DR 901. Action. Arthur Penhaligon formally requests permission to serve a writ of summons to the respondent, Ignis, and to preside over a formal arbitration hearing. Supervisor Bromwell nearly had an aneurysm. "You can't be serious, Penhaligon. You're a clerk, not a dragon tamer. This is a flagrant abuse of process." "On the contrary, Supervisor," Arthur said calmly, citing a passage from the Adjudicator's Handbook. Section 7, Paragraph 3 clearly states that mediation must be considered as a primary option before lethal enforcement is authorized. I am simply following procedure. The motion, to everyone's shock, was approved. The system, in its cold, logical way, agreed. Mediation was the proper procedure. The fact that it was insanely dangerous was not a factor in its legal calculus. Arthur was granted a 24-hour leave from his duties. He spent his meager savings on a set of dark leather armor, a simple steel dagger, and a silencing charm for his boots. He looked less like an adventurer and more like a very serious accountant out for a late-night audit. The climb up Cinder Peak was terrifying. The air grew hot and thick with sulfur. The charred remains of dwarven mining carts littered the path. As he approached the caldera, he activated stealth. The world seemed to dim slightly as he melted into the shadows of the rocks. His presence became a whisper, a footnote in the environment. He found Ignis sleeping atop a massive pile of gold and jewels, the heat from his slumbering body making the air shimmer. The dragon was magnificent and terrifying, his scales the color of cooling lava, his size that of a small house. Serving the summons was the critical part. The writ had to be physically placed upon the respondent. Arthur crept forward, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. He held the rolled-up parchment, which glowed with a faint golden light. He reached the dragon's massive, scaled flank. With a hand that trembled only slightly, he gently placed the writ upon one of the scales. The moment the parchment touched the dragon, the golden light flared. Writ of summons has been legally served. Respondent: Ignis, Red Dragon. Hearing time: 12 hours from service. Location: Hall of Judgment, Ethel Cathedral. Penalty for non-appearance: level drain. Elemental skill lock: fire. Ignis awoke with a roar that shook the mountain. His massive eye, a slit of molten gold, swiveled and locked directly onto Arthur. Stealth was instantly broken by the sheer force of the dragon's perception. "You!" the dragon bellowed, his voice a cataclysm of fire and rage. "Tiny, soft thing! What have you done?" Arthur, to his own surprise, did not run. He stood his ground, drew himself up to his full, unimpressive height, and spoke in the clearest, most formal voice he could manage. "Ignis, pursuant to case file DR 901, you have been formally summoned to an arbitration hearing to address the grievance filed by the Iron Axe mining clan. A full copy of the charges has been magically transcribed into your mind. Failure to appear will result in penalties as stipulated by the system accords." The dragon stared, bewildered. He was prepared for knights, for mages, for heroes. He was not prepared for a lawsuit. Penalties? Ignis roared, smoke billowing from his nostrils. "I am a dragon. I am a cataclysm. Your system does not apply to me." "That is an incorrect assertion," Arthur stated flatly. He activated Cite Precedent. A glowing line of text appeared in the air between them. As per the ruling in the Mountain Titan versus the Sky Gods, all beings who draw power from and exist within the system are subject to its laws, regardless of their individual power level. Your draconic nature grants you certain rights and exemptions, which I will be happy to outline at the hearing, but it does not grant you immunity. Ignis was taken aback. He could feel the writ, a cold spot on his warm scales, an undeniable link to the system's authority. He could also feel the attached penalties, a terrifyingly real threat to his power. He could easily incinerate the small man before him, but he could not incinerate the law. "This is preposterous," the dragon fumed. "Nevertheless, it is binding," Arthur said. "I will see you at the hearing." He gave a short, formal bow, then turned and walked away, his legs feeling like jelly. He did not run. An adjudicator never runs from a respondent. He made it halfway down the mountain before the adrenaline wore off, and he had to sit down and hyperventilate for 10 minutes. He had served a legal summons on a dragon, and now he had to face him in court. The Hall of Judgment was a place of stark, intimidating authority. It was a vast, circular chamber, its walls inscribed with the foundational laws of the system, glowing with a soft, silver light. In the center was a single obsidian dais for the adjudicator. There were no jury boxes, no public galleries. This was a place for the law to be interpreted, pure and absolute. Arthur stood at the dais, wearing a newly acquired set of formal adjudicators, robes over his leather armor. Supervisor Bromwell and a handful of other high-ranking cathedral officials watched from a magically shielded observation alcove, their faces a mixture of horror and disbelief. The dwarven clan lords, led by a grim-faced dwarf named Thorin Ironaxe, stood on one side of the chamber, their magnificent beards still looking a bit crispy at the ends. Then, Ignis appeared. He did not walk in. He was summoned directly into the chamber by the hall's magic, forced to appear in a blast of fire and brimstone. To accommodate his size, the system had automatically scaled him down to a more manageable, horse-sized version of himself, but he was still a terrifying presence of scales, claws, and barely contained rage. "This is an outrage!" Ignis bellowed, his voice echoing in the vast hall. "A mockery!" "The hearing is now in session," Arthur announced, his voice amplified by the hall's acoustics. He banged a small ceremonial gavel on the dais. "Case file, Marsh DR 901. We are here to arbitrate the dispute between the petitioner, the Iron Axe Mining clan, and the respondent, Ignis. Let the record show that both parties are present. I will hear the petitioner's opening statement first. Thorin Ironaxe stepped forward, his voice a low rumble. This beast has driven us from our ancestral home, a home granted to us by the first king, a home we've worked for 1,000 years. He has destroyed our property and, most grievously, he has singed our beards. We demand justice. We demand the beast be slain and our mountain returned. Arthur nodded. Your grievance is noted. Ignis, your response? The dragon snorted a jet of flame that harmlessly dissipated against the hall's magical wards. His ancestral home? The mountain is mine by right of conquest and fire. Their claim is invalid. They are thieves and squatters. A serious accusation, Arthur said, his gaze unwavering. Do you have any evidence to support this claim? This was the moment. The entire case hinged on this. The dwarves, confident in their millennia-long tradition, had never bothered to reread the fine print. Ignis, a creature of instinct and power, had no concept of charters or legal documents. Neither side knew the truth. Only Arthur did. Evidence? Ignis laughed, a terrible grinding sound. I am the evidence. My fire is the law. An eloquent but legally unsubstantiated position, Arthur replied coolly. He raised a hand, and a glowing replica of the dwarves' original land charter appeared, floating in the air. This is the document upon which the Iron Axe clan bases their claim. It is indeed an ancient and powerful legal instrument. The dwarves puffed out their chests with pride. However, Arthur continued, and with a flick of his wrist he highlighted a single line of glowing text. It contains a reversion clause. The land grant is valid for 1,000 years or until the return of the fiery scourge. As Ignis is a red dragon and therefore qualifies as a fiery scourge under multiple historical and mythological precedents, the charter, and thus the dwarves' legal claim to the mountain expired the moment he established his lair. A stunned silence fell over the hall. The dwarves stared at the glowing text, their faces paling. Thorin's jaw worked, but no sound came out. Ignis blinked his great golden eyes, a flicker of genuine surprise in their depths. They really are squatters? The dragon murmured, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his snout. Based on a strict interpretation of system law, yes, Arthur confirmed. Therefore, I must dismiss the petitioner's primary claim of ownership. He banged the gavel. Motion to dismiss granted. The dwarves looked utterly defeated. Thorin slumped, his axe hanging limply in his hand. However, Arthur said, his voice sharp, cutting through the silence, that does not resolve the entire case. We still have the matter of the property damage claim. Ignis scoffed. Their property? It was on my mountain. I can do with it as I please. Incorrect, Arthur said, pulling up another document. The common law of sentient territories. While you are the legal resident of the mountain, the dwarves' property was moved onto the territory while they were still, in good faith, under the protection of their charter. Therefore, their property was not forfeit. Your actions in destroying their mining equipment were illegal. He looked directly at the dragon. Furthermore, and most importantly, we have the issue of the beards. He cited another law, this one from the Adventurers Guild Charter, which had surprisingly broad applications. Section 19, Clause C. The willful and malicious destruction of a registered guild member's trademark physical attribute shall be considered an act of aggravated assault. The signature beards of the Iron Axe clan are registered with the guild as a cultural and professional trademark. By setting them on fire, you committed a direct and actionable assault against every dwarf present. Ignis was now utterly bewildered. He had followed the argument about the mountain, but this talk of trademarks and beards was beyond him. He was a dragon. He burned things. Since when was that a crime? Arthur pressed his advantage. Therefore, I find in favor of the petitioners on the count of property damage and aggravated assault. I am ordering you, Ignis, to pay reparations. Pay? Ignis roared. With what? I have no gold. You are sleeping on a pile of it, Arthur pointed out. That is my hoard. It is not for paying fines. The system allows for reparations to be made in forms other than currency, Arthur said, his mind working furiously. This was the endgame. It allows for the establishment of a symbiotic contractual agreement beneficial to both parties. He outlined his ruling, his final judgment. The dwarves would relinquish all claims to the mountain's interior. It was Ignis's lair, legally and forever. In return, Ignis would enter into a formal contract with the dwarves. The dwarves would be permitted to mine the exterior of the mountain, away from his lair. In exchange for this right, and as reparation for the damages, the dwarves would tithe 10% of all raw ores and 100% of all raw gemstones directly to Ignis's hoard. Furthermore, Ignis would serve as the official guardian of their mining operation, protecting them from rival clans or monsters. This would fulfill his draconic instinct to guard treasure, as their mine was now legally a source for his hoard. The dwarves looked at each other. They had lost their ancestral halls, but they had gained a dragon-guarded, infinitely safer, and still incredibly profitable mining operation. Thorin slowly nodded. Ignis considered it. He would get to keep his mountain, his authority was officially recognized by the system, and his hoard would grow continuously without him having to lift a claw, and he would get to terrify anyone who tried to steal from him. It was a very draconic arrangement. He slowly nodded. Arthur banged his gavel. The ruling is decided. The contract is binding and will be filed with the system immediately. This hearing is adjourned. As the dwarves and the now surprisingly placid dragon were teleported away, Arthur finally allowed himself a moment of relief. He had successfully mediated a dispute between a dragon and an entire clan of dwarves. He had won. Case file, Dr. DR 901 closed. Resolution. Successful arbitration. You have been awarded 10,000 CEXP. You have leveled up. You are now level 10. New skill acquired, Contract Law Mastery, Passive. New skill acquired, Cease and Desist Order. Class upgrade, System Adjudicator, Grade 3. He had won his case, but more importantly, he had gained the attention of some very powerful beings. His quiet life in the sub-basement was officially over. Arthur's victory in the dragon-dwarf dispute sent shockwaves through the celestial bureaucracy. He was promoted to Grade 3, given a larger office with a window, and assigned cases that were previously far above his pay grade. He became the go-to adjudicator for creative solutions, which was a polite term for exploiting loopholes no one else had the patience to find. He issued a cease and desist order to a lich who was illegally raising the corpses from a graveyard, citing that the bodies were still technically the property of the deceased's estate. The lich, a being of immense magical power, was forced to comply or face system-sanctioned soul decay. He used his contract law mastery to renegotiate the pact between a village and a local Fey lord, closing a loophole the Fey had been using for centuries to trick villagers out of their most cherished memories. With each successfully closed case, his power and reputation grew. He invested the CEXP into his rogue subclass, becoming surprisingly adept with a dagger and capable of moving through the cathedral's halls as silently as a shadow. He was an adjudicator, but he was also a spy, a detective, and a master of fine print. His biggest challenge arrived in the form of a summons, not from him, but for him. He was called to the apex, the highest chamber of the cathedral, to stand before the arch-arbiters themselves, beings of immense power who were the ultimate interpreters of the system's law. Arthur Penhaligon, one of the arch-arbiters, spoke, its voice a chorus of perfectly harmonized tones. It was an angel, its form a being of pure golden light and interwoven geometric shapes. Your work has been unorthodox. You have bent the law to its very limit. I have only ever acted within the law, Arthur replied, his voice steady. The law is a tool. I simply use it as it was written. Indeed, the angel hummed. Which is why we have a new case for you. A case that cannot be solved by paladins or mages. A case that requires a creative interpretation of the highest order. The case was a divine one. A fallen god, a minor deity of shadow and secrets named Nocturne, had found a way to cheat the system. Long ago, he had been defeated and imprisoned in an ethereal prison by the goddess of light, Luxia. The terms of his imprisonment were laid out in a divine contract, a binding agreement between the two deities, witnessed and enforced by the system. So the contract stated that Nocturne would remain imprisoned for as long as the sun shines upon the realm of Ethel. It was meant to be a poetic way of saying forever. But Nocturne, much like Arthur, was a master of fine print. He had begun using his shadowy influence to subtly empower a cult of mortals on the surface. This cult was not trying to free him. They were constructing a massive arcane engine designed to blot out the sun. Not forever, but for a short period. They planned to create a magical, realm-wide eclipse that would last for a mere 60 seconds. But for those 60 seconds, the sun would not be shining on Ethel. And according to the literal written text of the divine contract, Nocturne would be free. Once free, even for a moment, the contract would be void, and re-imprisoning him would require a new war among the gods. The goddess Luxia's hands are tied, the angel explained. Her paladins cannot attack the cultists because the cult is not technically breaking any laws. They are merely building a device. Until they activate it, no crime has been committed. But by the time they do, it will be too late. We need you to find a loophole in a divine contract. We need you to stop a god with paperwork. Arthur felt a thrill of pure intellectual excitement. This was the ultimate legal challenge. He was granted access to the divine archives, a library that existed outside of time and space. He spent what felt like years reading the contract between Luxia and Nocturne. It was a masterpiece of divine law, every word infused with cosmic power. It seemed unassailable, but nothing was perfect. He found his angle not in the main body of the contract, but in the witness list. Every divine contract had to be witnessed by other cosmic entities to be valid. The witness for this particular contract was a neutral party, an ancient, primordial being of time and space known as the Chronos Weaver. Arthur dug into the Chronos Weaver's history. It was a reclusive entity that rarely interfered in mortal or divine affairs. Its only role was to observe and record. But in his research, he found a reference to a long-forgotten event. Millennia ago, the Chronos Weaver had been grievously wounded in a battle during the primordial wars. As a result, its perception of time was fractured. It perceived past, present, and future not as a linear sequence, but all at once. This was the key. Arthur returned to the apex. "I have a solution," he announced. "It is unorthodox." "We expect nothing less," the angel replied. Arthur presented his argument. The cult's plan hinged on a linear interpretation of time. The sun shines, then it doesn't. Then Nocturne is free. But the contract's sole witness did not perceive time linearly. To the Chronos Weaver, the moment the contract was signed and the future moment of the artificial eclipse were happening at the same time. Therefore, Arthur argued, I contend that the witness, due to its fractured perception, would perceive the conditions for Nocturne's release as being met at the very instant the contract was signed. From its point of view, the contract was simultaneously valid and void. "A paradox," the angel hummed. "Precisely," Arthur said. "And the system has a very specific protocol for dealing with paradoxical contracts. It triggers the nullification and reversion clause. The contract is declared null and void from its inception, and both parties are reverted to their state immediately prior to the signing." The angel was silent for a long moment, processing the sheer audacity of the argument. "You are suggesting we retroactively erase a divine contract from history based on the psychological state of its witness?" "I am suggesting we enforce the system's own rules regarding paradoxical legal instruments," Arthur corrected. "It is the only way to close Nocturne's loophole without violating the terms of the contract as it is currently written." The arch-arbiters conferred in a silent chorus of light. Finally, the lead angel spoke. "The argument is sound. The precedent, while obscure, is valid. File the motion, Adjudicator Penhaligon." Arthur smiled. He raised his hand and spoke the words, with the full force of his authority. "File motion, Contract nullification due to paradoxical witness testimony. The effect was instantaneous and reality-altering. A wave of shimmering energy washed out from the cathedral, so subtle that no mortal would notice it. In his ethereal prison, Nocturne suddenly felt the terms of his binding change. The contract that promised his release vanished, replaced by the cold, hard reality of his defeat. His loophole was gone, erased from time. His cult on the surface suddenly found their arcane engine inert, its purpose and design wiped from their minds as the future it was meant to create no longer existed. Divine tier, case file closed. Resolution, successful contract nullification. You have been awarded an unprecedented amount of CEXP. Your level is now capped until you undergo a class apotheosis. All core skills have been upgraded to sovereign rank. New title acquired, Paradox Closer. Arthur stood before the Arch-Arbiters, not as a clerk, not even as a grade 3 adjudicator, but as something more. He had outmaneuvered a god not with power, but with logic. He had proven that the pen, or in his case the legal motion, was truly mightier than the sword, the spell, or even the sun itself. The system was a rulebook, and he had just written his own chapter,